Welcome, everyone. The role of those advising future-ready student athletes has evolved dramatically. School counselors, college counseling professionals, and athletic administrators are no longer simply guiding students through the college admissions process. Today, we're helping young people navigate a rapidly changing landscape that includes college recruiting, NIL opportunities, personal branding, mental performance, athletic performance, leadership development, and long-term career readiness. As the expectations placed on student athletes continues to grow, so does our responsibility as counselors to equip them with the skills, mindset, and support systems needed to thrive, not only in college athletics, but throughout their lives. That is why I am especially excited to introduce today's presenter, Drew DeBiasse, our founding director of human performance at Polaris Athlete Hub. Drew brings a unique and impactful perspective to the development of student athletes. Her work focuses on helping young people build the habits, resilience, self-awareness, and sense of purpose that fuel success both on and off the field. She understands that performance is about much more than athletic achievement. It is about preparing students to lead, adapt, and excel in every aspect of life. Today, Drew will challenge us to think differently about how we support student athletes and how we can better prepare them for the opportunities and demands of the future. Please join me today in welcoming Drew DeBiasse.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jeff. As he said, my name's Drew DeBiasse. I'm a high performance and somatic development provider. I have a big umbrella that I work under, but I predominantly work with professional athletes and teams across major sports, but also starting to work more with top prospects and Division I athletes. As Jeff said, we talk all the time about how the best practices that are starting to emerge in terms of supporting athletes who are already in the system at a high level is catching them earlier and helping them build a foundation that allows them to cope as they not only get older throughout their academics, but move along the kind of chain of levels in whatever sport or sports that they're playing. So a huge thank you to Polaris and to all of you guys for being here today, because it helps to cast a wider net and help more young athletes at earlier ages. One of the reasons I think I was so excited to speak to counselors specifically is because you guys are stepping into spaces that extend way beyond academics. I hear from some counselors, and Jeff tells me about his conversations with like across the country, where counselors are helping navigate things like stress, pressure, identity, anxiety or depression, just general uncertainty about what's next, burnout, relational issues at home or within their sports, future planning. It really, I think, is bleeding into every single area of their life. And I think today too, I don't want to just focus on performance in sports. I want to really stress that how we support young athletes should create like a holistic readiness to just like be the best person that they can be. And if that includes athletics, that's great. But if not, whenever playing is done, they are ready to kind of be their best self in whatever environment they step into. So I guess also I do want to put it out there too. I know there's a good number of us on the call, but if there's ever just like a question that pops into your head about something that I'm speaking about, please feel free to jump in. This doesn't have to be super formal or anything like that. So there will be time for questions at the end, but if you want to hop in, feel free to interject at any time. So one thing I want to start off by saying is that recent research has shown that upwards of 70% of youth athletes quit organized sports before they turn 13. This is a staggering number. I think all of us can think back to our childhood and playing different sports, and it was very casual, and it was a great sense of joy in our upbringing, where it was more about community and socializing versus any sort of competitive element. So burnout, loss of enjoyment, excessive pressure, specialization, just overall negative sports experience is starting to hammer young people. And that also leaves a good chunk of those kids who make it past that 13-year-old threshold that are looking at a totally different sports landscape, thanks to, a big thanks to NIL, but also things like social media visibility or comparison and fear of falling behind. I think there is a lot of pressure coming from parents. I don't want to say that parents are coming from a bad place. I think parents generally want the best for their kids, but it is starting to create a heavy expectation around performing at younger and younger ages. So this is why we're starting to kind of see the more existential crises and things like recruiting rejection or injuries, creating a sense of worthlessness or hopelessness that we can start to kind of interrupt and help them, again, see their life at large and not just see themselves as this one thing. It's like being an athlete. So I think one of the things that I think counselors and hopefully parents are starting to pick up on is that there are some warning signs and things like athletes maybe spiraling after mistakes or emotional outbursts, feeling like they can't cope, or physical or emotional crashes, maybe extreme perfectionism, something that gets brought up in counselors' offices often, that we're starting to really pick up on these patterns that normally we would see at a very high level are showing up in younger kids. And one of the ways that we can interrupt these patterns is to understand how we accidentally reinforce them. And the way that typically happens is that we ask young athletes questions like, how did you play? Did you win? Who's recruiting you? Questions about performance metrics or ranking. Kids are ranked in all different ways as they move up the chain of athletics. Asking even about camps or showcases that they're going to be attending, or what are your coaches saying to you? What kind of feedback are you getting about how you're playing? Or anything that basically unintentionally usually tells athletes that their value increases when they perform and perform well. So one of my favorite stories that has actually more recently been talked about is Scottie Scheffler's mom. When he was a young training golf player, she never ever asked how he played that day when he got home. Instead, they would talk about everything else, and if he wanted to touch on that he could bring it up and maybe talk about more specifics about how he was playing. But her whole thing is just that she wanted to support him as a person without the extra pressure of making him feel like he needed to perform at a certain level to be worthy of her love or attention. And now we kind of see how that's playing out, is that he has a very healthy way of relating to himself as a golfer, but sees himself as much more than that, where he is way more likely to talk about his faith or family or what he's doing outside of playing golf. And so centering conversations entirely around outcomes are just again, unintentionally, but also unfortunately reinforcing the patterns, and we can change how we speak to athletes so that they feel like they're not just an athlete, they are a bigger person. So there are some questions that I think we put on slides as examples about what we can ask instead of did you win or how many points did you score? And those questions are much more centered around how a person is feeling or coping or like engaging internally. So more tied to felt sense, like what felt different in your body today, or at this point, like what part of your game do you feel most free? What challenged you emotionally and how did you respond? What helped you reset? What are you enjoying about competing? How were you as a teammate? Even just, I think Jeff talks about this often and very well, is that as a counselor, it's very important to ask them, like, what are they enjoying outside of playing? And this kind of shifts from identity just being attached and narrowed around being an athlete into like being a much more dynamic person.
Drew, I just would like to jump in here.
Yeah, please do.
In doing so and being able to tee those questions off, I also find that it removes the pressure, and this quote here in the background in regards to this particular approach. This has always been the mantra so much when it comes to athletics. It's that brick by brick mentality. It's, iron sharpens iron. We could go on and on for an hour just with those, the one-liners as it relates to everything. But to take a countercultural approach to that from an identity standpoint and to be able to ask these kids, outside of that sport, what it is, I think that's where the magic really happens. And that's where we can also genuinely build rapport with them as counselors, as stakeholders that are coming to the conversation in a way where we're not as invested in the outcome. We're not as invested in the stat line and everything. We're more invested in that total person. And by doing so and making ourselves authentic in that approach, it opens them up and they realize that they have somebody there. And I think that's the starting point for so many of us in this profession with every student that comes across the threshold of that office door. That's how we build that rapport to make that impact, to instill trust and everything. So in terms of identity and the identity trap, I think that's important to really kind of drive home.
Yeah. Another part of that too, about like the not being as invested in outcome, there's also like a hierarchy element to this too, where a child like has many hierarchy type systems and roles that they play, where like their parent is definitely above them and they like create rules of the house and things like that they need to fit within, as they should. But also like the coach to player is also very much a hierarchical type system where the coach is making decisions, and the counselors or service providers have a unique opportunity where they can kind of level that off, where instead of being like, I'm above you, listen to me, it's I'm with you. How can we work together to create the type of foundation or toolbox that you can use to feel more like psychologically safe in your like internally in your own body, but also having to kind of like cope within these systems where you don't have a bunch of control, that you can, show up and do your best and still things might not work out the way you want. That's it's just kind of a performance paradox that I have to talk to people all the way up at the professional level about, is that you can have a really good process and have a bad outcome. You can also have a bad process and get a good outcome. And so you have to be kind of nuanced in how you look at how you're showing up, and counselors and service providers are a huge part of that in helping athletes be more stable within very unstable and uncertain environments. So I'm glad you brought that up. So another little bit of research here too that I want to touch on is how there is a goal setting blind spot that we're seeing across athletics, but also just in general with how people kind of engage with the things that they're pursuing. And there was a meta-analysis done about goal setting recently. I think it was published in just last year. But it basically found that process goals produced a very large effect on performance. Performance goals produced just kind of a moderate effect, and then outcome-oriented goals produced a very negligible effect. So this makes sense when you think about how the nervous system operates, but outcome goals often carry they carry a lot of undue pressure, and it creates kind of a tug of war between approach and avoidance motivation, where part of the athlete, moving towards success is also trying to like avoid failure, and it like creates a sense of like inner turbulence, and attention becomes split. So when you can help somebody orient themselves around process and how they show up, that it starts to speak the language of action. So it's not so much about like, what if I fail, but to more about like, what can I do next? How do I show up for this next play, or for the next day, or for the next game? So it creates kind of a forward momentum and gives them something stable that they can rely on no matter what they're up against. So something to definitely keep in mind and maybe look into as counselors when it comes to goal setting or any kind of top-down tool. So for me personally, in my work, it helped me in working with athletes to distill down and help people understand that performance shows up in 4 different dimensions, and the potential tied to those dimensions is not created equally. So there's a slide here with a graphic coming up that it shows the 4 dimensions that I personally teach in my own work and practice. And those dimensions are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And as depicted here, they're like concentric circles. So we often think about this backwards, where we think that the bulk of our potential lies in our physicality, how like strong we are, fast, how we recover, mobility, those more tangible assets, when really as you can see, the bulk of potential is in the following dimensions. We're starting to, as an industry, see people scratch the surface on the mental dimension. We're seeing more teams and leagues kind of standardize positions in terms of like mental performance or like mental coordination, things like that. But even further than that we're still not seeing much of at all in like systems or teams, but maybe people are starting to do it on their own or get help elsewhere, is in the emotional and spiritual dimensions. Emotional looking more like self-awareness or felt sense, emotional regulation, resilience, or stress tolerance. Adaptability is a huge one, or relational skills with how they're kind of like relating to the people that are within their worlds. So not just like in terms of playing a sport and needing to relate well and like with coaches or teammates, but also just people in their life at large. And then kind of building a sense of inner certainty over confidence is a big one for me. the amount of times that I have, especially young athletes, reach out and say, like, my confidence is shot. I don't feel like I can do this anymore, is helping them distinguish between how confidence is very like externally driven. We're seeing actually a lot in college baseball right now. If any of you are watching the World Series, there's like a lot of peacocking, a lot of like outward showing of like trying to show dominance, when really the players that do the best are the ones that have like a really strong sense of inner certainty. They've earned these things that they can stand behind, and whether they feel confident or not, they know that they've done the preparation to be able to do the work and show up in a way that they can feel good about, whether the outcome is there or not. And then of course, just staying organized under pressure. We see this on the biggest stages across leagues, where we have very good players and on paper they look very good, but under a certain type of pressure, things break, where they can do all the pressure or like all of the preparation in the world, but you add a certain level of pressure on top of it, and that skill set becomes inaccessible. So like bridging that gap is huge. And then spiritually, that's where like purpose and meaning and values, identity or character, where those types of things are built. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that in professional athletics, while physicality gets some people there, the ones who stay and are the best and do the best, like in the playoffs and at the highest level for the longest amount of time, they are for sure the ones who are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually very strong and stable, even if they aren't as physically dominant as maybe other players that you would see. So that's a model I work with very frequently, but it's helpful, I think, for people to see where there's a lot of gaps that can be filled. And for you guys as counselors, service providers, that mental, emotional, spiritual part is the bulk of where I feel like people can get better. So a huge amount of potential there.
Sorry to keep jumping around and interrupting, Drew, but I wanted to bring it back to this slide specifically, just because if we're looking at those 4 domains, us as counselors seeing kids on a day-to-day basis, you know, these are the patterns that we can now recognize across those 4 domains in terms of everything, because so much of it is surface level if we're just, you know, fixated on the physical or potentially the emotional outbursts and the results of whatever, oftentimes as a result of physical ailments or issues along the way. So in terms of these patterns, how to identify these patterns, or how to communicate with parents in regards to these patterns in a way that, you know, comes from the lens of those 4 domains, I think would be really important for our work as well.
It is, especially because in the age of NIL, development is dying. I know that sounds bleak and like catastrophic, but the reality is that NIL is creating an atmosphere where kids are essentially being told that they have to show up ready at the college level. So it's like, it's essentially outsourcing kids' development, where normally you would think of college as a big developmental period for kids as people and as athletes. So it's like those pressures are then getting put on them younger and younger to have this certain almost professional level skill set, and nobody's teaching them how to do it. So they have all this pressure on them, but they have no real tools, like toolbox to work with, to feel like they can do that and adapt in real time, or like work with those rising pressures in healthy ways. So so it's a big area that we talk about often in maybe the college setting, but at club baseball or the like training academies for football, things like that, because at some point we have to step in and say, like, we need to catch people younger. We need to provide them tools that they can take with them so that even in all of these changing environments, they still have something stable internally that they can rely on and don't feel like they need to have somebody there to hold their hand the whole time. The idea isn't to like cushion or bubble wrap their experience. There's, we're all going to have these highs and lows in our life. It's just the nature of living. I do think if you're an athlete, those highs and lows tend to swing a lot higher and lower. But there's a way to move through that and have it not feel so turbulent. And that's what that, like having a different toolbox and having like some different language to talk about these things with kids, like that's what that's helping to build, is a much more steady path forward, even in those extreme uncertainties. So I'm glad you came back to this as well, because one thing I do want to highlight is that perfectionism is something that gets brought up a lot in conversations I have, where I'm sure many of you in your schooling have talked about how, like, early on in childhood, when somebody develops a perfectionistic type pattern, that those patterns often feel very life and death, where anybody from the outside looking in, you're kind of like, what's the big deal? Like, I don't know, if you can't nail it every time, what's the issue? But for somebody who develops that at a very young age, it's almost like an inner contract that they make, that like, if they can't do it perfectly each time, then they're not worthy of love or opportunity or to be seen as themselves or to be able to be like an authentic person. So just wanted to point that one out specifically, since I hear about it a lot. What's up, Ian?
I love all of it, Drew and Jeff. I just had a question. I work at an all boys school and we're 6 through 12.
Okay.
It's Catholic, so I loved the image of, the physical, the spiritual. I guess what I struggle with is like how to make the mental, emotional cool for young men. We've searched for examples. I know Michael Phelps and Kobe both talk about it. Navy SEALs use like mental training. Any other good recommendations to try, or like, I don't know, how can we make mental reflection or even like mindfulness cool for young men?
Yeah, good question. I actually think there are a lot of good emerging examples where, like, Steph Curry is a huge proponent of somatic work. He does a bunch of yoga. You can see him on the sideline, like taking time to himself before or during like timeouts, where he's got his eyes closed and he's working on breathing through his nose. And one fun thing about Steph too, I mean, he's just like one of my favorite people on the planet, but if you watch him, his relation, because he does do all this mindfulness work, and he's very and he has that like inner certainty to him. When you watch him under pressure, he is like smiling. Just this past season, there was a game that like, it was like coming down to the wire and they were like coming back, and then right at the end they fouled him, and him being on the line was either they were going to lose if he didn't make it, but if he made it, they were going to win. And before he even shot, and they were away, so like the whole crowd is just like yelling epithets at him and screaming at him, and you can just hear it in the crowd, and he is smiling because he knows he's going to end their night. And it wasn't like, one thing that mindfulness really does well is it helps take you out of the center of the universe, where things stop feeling so personal, where by nature it like de-escalates your like how you like fit into that equation. So Steph is such a perfect one to look at too, because it also helps. Oh my God, I could go on for like an hour about this and about him. But one thing it does too is one of the biggest qualities and most important qualities an athlete can have is a sense of rhythm. And that is like internal and unique to everybody. That's like a unique part of expression. And when you're mindful and you have like a sense of like your inner world, you have a very, very close and intimate relationship with your own unique rhythm. So it's like the biggest competitive edge that you can have. Some of the best athletes that we have in sports today all have that rhythmic quality and that like inner understanding of their unique gift. So it shows up in unique ways. Jokic is a huge one. I mean, he's a big guy. He is not the most physically fit by a long shot. He's a big oaf. He's not the fastest. He's actually quite slow, but he's also probably the first point center that we've ever seen. And he runs laps around people, like by far the best player. In my opinion, probably the best player that we've ever seen in basketball. Caitlin Clark is a big one. She has a sense of rhythm that is so strong that like she has turnovers because she's so far ahead of people. Like her rhythm is so advanced, where like even her teammates have a hard time catching up to her. Katie Ledecky, if you've ever watched her swim, she is like a rhythm machine. Michaela Schifrin, insane rhythm, even under extreme pressure. Like for her, a mistake, it can literally be life or death, but her sense of rhythm creates like space around the way that she operates. Every single person that I have talked about uses mindfulness in some capacity, how they're doing breath work, whether they're doing meditation or visualization. But I think maybe one last thing I'll say too is that why I really gravitate towards somatic work, like body-based work, is because those signals that are like originating in the body inform your brain, like they are starting in your body. So if you can help kids like be in their body and have like a really keen connection to what they're feeling at any given time, they can make a real-time strategic adjustment to be their best. When they aren't in their body and they aren't picking up on those signals, they can't make adjustments. You cannot change or fix or address something that you can't feel. So it is like the biggest competitive edge, I think, on the table is helping them just be in their body and feel things. You might need to get to the bottom of whether they have like a sensory gate, like if they're able to feel their body at all, or if they're dissociating or numbing or trying to selectively numb, which we know doesn't work. You end up kind of numbing it all. So I'm rambling, but did I answer you at all, Ian? Making it cool. I mean, oh my gosh, Aaron Judge is in that camp, although he's still working on some areas, but many
But
MLB
really,
are using.
it leads us all right back to here though, Drew, like in in terms of what athletes actually need. And this extends beyond athletes, it's all students, all developing adolescents. Really, like this is the bingo card for successful development as it relates to preparing them for the world. Yeah.
There's a way to like hinge your whole life on some sort of like easy, tangible, physical thing. But the reality is that all of that chases a very high ceiling. So in performance, like everybody's trying to make their best better, right? So we're trying to like edge up our performance ceiling. And it's not bad to want to make your best better. I want to say that. Where you guys come in and where service providers come in and understanding that there's deeper layers to this is that most people, even with a very high ceiling, have a very low floor. So if something doesn't go their way or they have a mistake in the game, they usually plummet. And then they have a very hard time kind of like getting back to where they feel like they're doing a good job or contributing. We see it even at the professional level, where if somebody makes a mistake, that it often can compound. Like, so one error might turn into 2 or 3 errors within like a short amount of time. Frustration fouls is a big one in basketball that you see a lot, or like missing free throws. But like in baseball, an error in the field, or a pitcher like hitting a batter and then they can't throw a strike and then they get pulled. But anyway, so low, like high ceiling, low floor. And I can name big names in sports right now if you want to hear a couple that absolutely drive me crazy. But where we come in is that we can help use a different set of tools and a different way of engaging with young athletes to help raise their floor, so that now, like, whether or not they're like the strongest, fastest, fittest, like most skilled, it like up in here doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. This is huge, to take somebody from plummeting like in their life or in the middle of a game to getting them up here where like maybe something doesn't go their way, but it's not that big of a deal. They're just like right back up. You guys understand what I'm saying? That's like this, that is a huge area that we can contribute to, where a mistake is not so detrimental, where it's not like creating a negative feedback loop, or creating a scenario where it puts a kid in a situation where maybe they make a mistake or they're not quite 100%, and then like a coach benches them or something. Then that like creates kind of like a performance safety issue, where they start to perceive like, if I'm not perfect, then there's consequences. Then I like am not good enough, or I'm not going to play. So it creates too much tension around them needing to deliver. But instead, if they have a way where they like you can't change the rock, you can change how it ripples. So maybe there is an error, but there are things that can happen right after that. You can use your breathing, you can like ground yourself down, you can work with felt sense in your body to rebound. And then your system starts to learn that, oh, it's not the end of the world. Like I can bounce back from this. This doesn't have to be it. And then that's like a huge runway for people to move forward in healthy ways. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, Drew, it does. And you do a lot of work in regards to nervous system recovery and its effect on athletes in real time as a result of performance, but in quality of life as well. So can you just elaborate a little bit on the dysregulated nervous system and how that?
Yeah. So anytime somebody has I should say this, there's both like chronic and acute like nervous system type changes. So like what we were saying just now about how there can be errors or mistakes or something, and there's maybe an immediate dysregulation where their heart rate might spike, or like their breathing gets all over the place, or they get really tense. They might even start cramping sometimes. Like that's definitely a symptom that we see, where they literally get cramps in their legs or in their back. That there's also more chronic ones that we can help address, where maybe they aren't recovering very well, or they're not sleeping very well, that there's some sort of change in their diet or their appetite. Maybe it's that their attention starts to get scattered, or their decision making kind of takes a hit, or they might not be as emotionally flexible or resilient. That's usually a nervous system issue, where it just kind of means that things are like, we all have an ideal state of our nervous system, but day to day we encounter things that might make it like shift a little bit. And then sometimes those shifts like then get exacerbated, and then all of a sudden we're like way outside of a normal homeostasis in our nervous system. But there are things to help bring it back. I think there are of course lifestyle things that really help. But in the moment, things like breath work are really close to a silver bullet. There are things like a physiological sigh, which is a deep breath in through your nose, another breath in through your nose, and then an exhale sigh. And that helps like immediately remove cortisol from your system so that you can recover more in real time. Where instead of like seeing people struggle and not giving them tools to help correct in the moment, then it starts like compounding and we're like piling things on, and then they can't recover at the end of the day. So then they go to sleep, probably don't get very good sleep, and then they wake up and their baseline is lower. So they have like the same stressors the next day and they're starting from an even lower spot. So it digs people into a hole. Where if you look at the nervous system and instead try to see like when things maybe get a little haywire, how do we make an adjustment right then? How do we get them to recognize when their nervous system is starting to get a little edgy so that they can deploy some kind of tool, something to help them feel better in the moment, so that it isn't like they recognize maybe something's going wrong or they don't feel good, but they're just like, well, I guess I'm just going to keep going with my day. And then it gets worse off. So the early intervention, like help them recognize and not feel threatened by what they're feeling, but instead just recognize it as information. Like, this thing is happening. I can do this to help feel better right now, or to help calm myself or ground myself down right now, versus feel something and then get even more panicked by feeling that and feeling like there's threat. So that's like the not correcting in real time is when you get the constant state of hypervigilance or perfectionistic type patterns, feeling inordinate amount of pressure on top of the pressure that they might already be feeling, comparison, anything fear-based or something attached to like the uncertainty. Overthinking or OCD is a big one that starts to develop, where there might be some sort of a threat response happening, and instead of calming down, they like think they're rising to the occasion by trying to control everything else in their environment. Emotional fatigue or emotional crash outs are a big one, where they might seem totally fine, and then have like a big outburst. So as we talked about, just kind of another quick rundown of what you guys are most likely to start seeing early, where in conversations in passing or in deeper conversations, maybe in your office, you might pick up on some of these. And that's just not a sign or like a cause to panic, but an opportunity to instead help teach kids other tools and give them some sort of understanding about where they're at, like help them zoom out, see a bigger picture. I think we're getting kind of towards the end here, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Let's see, maybe I can open it up to questions here too, and we can help tie this up. But I do just want to one more time really hit that these things that are on the screen right now, I think sometimes from people who are more old school, or maybe some of the more squeaky wheels that are still kind of contributing to the conversation, label things like this as soft, but it's actually strategic. These are all competitive edges, whether you continue to play sports or whether you enter some sort of business world, college atmosphere. Having these types of qualities in a more stable foundation is where we all do our best work. So keeping an eye on these it's not soft. It is strategic. And if anybody says they're soft, you can just give them my name and number, and I'm happy to chat with them.
Drew,
Okay.
thank you. I'd love to just jump in before we open it up for questions in terms of from everyone here. But in respect to our role as a counselor, especially in developing future ready student athletes for today's current landscape and whatever tomorrow has in store for us, we cannot have conversations with these student athletes and with these families without bringing, human performance, mental health, well-being into that conversation, because it's an unprecedented amount of pressure in which these kids are experiencing without the skills, without the tools in the toolbox to navigate those pathways as it relates to this new landscape. And as of which, whether they transition to college to play athletics or not, we have a responsibility to them when they are in high school as student athletes who value participation and value that experience. And so it just leads us to really reflect upon what is the purpose of high school athletics? What is the purpose of youth sports? And how can we do right by these kids in regards to their development by using sport as that vehicle for them? So that's where I'm really glad you're able to come on in today to be able to speak with us and everything as it relates to this, because if we push into this moment and provide them with the tools necessary and the frameworks that you've created, they're going to be able to navigate not just the athletic side of this thing, but the rest of their life's journey for them in a way that's going to be so much healthier than the alternative, So thank you for that.
Appreciate it. The one thing I'll add to that is that we always have to talk about the inevitable transition for kids leaving athletics. Athletics do not go on forever. And I would say the biggest thing around the pain point of transitioning for an athlete, like leaving playing to just living their life outside of sports, is when they feel like they have unfinished business. And unfinished business happens when they're stuck in their own way, when they feel like they can't be fully present or give their best and feel good about what they did, whether the outcome was there or not. That's the biggest issue. Because I've even seen and worked with guys who have had a medical retirement from a professional sport, but if they felt like when they were playing, they were all in and they could give it everything and feel like they could stand behind what they did, even that forced transition was okay. They were able to move into a different part of their life and start working elsewhere. And, it was just such a healthier transition. But I've seen guys who maybe just aged out or whatever, but they had a very contentious relationship with their performance and how they showed up, really, really struggle on the back end and need much more significant help and long-term help. So when you catch people younger and help them build a healthier relationship with performance and understand the dynamics of it, then it helps give them that as they continue on, however far they go. Some of them won't make it to college athletics, and that's okay. They can still get, like Jeff said, a lot out of playing sports. They build leadership, they build community. There's so many wonderful qualities that you get from, especially playing a team sport. But just to piggyback on that is that you can help remove that pain point where they can put their whole self into what they're doing without having it consume their identity, where they only see what they do is who they are.
Right. And that's where I feel the silver lining of authentic NIL can actually, the other side of that NIL coin is one where we can take that kid who's interested. He's always been obsessed with dinosaurs since he was a child, and he loves barbecue, and he lives in upstate Western New York, and there's a dinosaur barbecue chain that's out there. Now, all of a sudden, he has a story to tell that's authentic to himself. It aligns with his interests, and he can push in and expand upon those interests and strengths and develop from an NIL perspective in a way that's not so sport generated and sport related. So I think that's another part of our job as counselors, is to get them to think of who they are outside of that roster spot that they're either chasing or excelling at, and build that identity outside of sport. And it's tough. Even as parents, we see it as early as our daughter's 5 years old, and the way that families show up to youth sports even at that age, it's identity building from the very beginning in this country. So that's why that's studied by the American Academy of Pediatrics that jumps out, and it's equal parts terrifying as it is insightful, because these kids are, they're living multiple sports careers before they're even a teenager, due to just the overtraining and the overperformance and everything, all the pressure that's being put on them. So yeah,
It's true.
yeah.
The psychological stress that comes from that too also makes people have a higher propensity to get injured and have soft tissue injuries. So there's that element of it too, that we're seeing younger and younger kids face more and more extreme injuries from the current culture around athletics.
Yeah. Any other questions? We could probably dive into the soft tissue injury rabbit hole here, just as a result of what the data looks like from an NBA perspective, and those injuries that are occurring there as a result of
very
the
bad
ecosystem. But no, this has been truly very informative, Drew, and really great having you on here today, kicking off first of many in which we'll be hearing from you. So that's super exciting. Drew,
yeah, happy to hear you. And I am open to take other questions if anybody has some.
Drew's email, or her website, is on the next slide here, and her email address is info@drewdbiasse.com. Known as the athlete's best kept secret. I don't think that's true anymore, though, Drew. I do feel like the secret's out here in regards to who you are and what you do. So yeah. But thank you, Drew. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks.
And
happy to if you guys have more questions, but feel free to email me too.
Awesome. A recording will be sent out following, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Drew. End meeting and stop recording and